And just so everybody knows, we will be recording this session just so we can share it afterward. We want to make sure that people who have different schedules are able to get all the information from Bill and the Allegheny Conference. All right, well, let's get started. Thank you so much to Bill Flanagan. Somebody's not muted. Sorry, we'll start again momentarily. Everybody, please put your mute on. And at the end, we'll be able to have a question and answer session that you'll be able to ask questions through the chat box. We ask you all mute your microphone so it doesn't interrupt Bill and what he's presenting today. And all right, let's get started. I just want to make sure his camera's on. Okay. So can everybody see me? I know everybody's muted, so you can't really answer. My name is Mandy Pryor. I'm the Executive Director of the Southwest Communities Chamber of Commerce. And I am here today with Bill Flanagan of the Allegheny Conference. He's the Chief Corporate Relations Officer for Allegheny Conference on Community Development. They've been a longtime partner of the Chamber, as well as different chambers throughout the region, bringing information that we couldn't learn more about what's going on in Pittsburgh and regionally without them. So we thank them for all that they're doing. Today, Bill is going to be touching base on the gas and oil industry, technology, healthcare, and the manufacturing sectors, as well as other information that they have recently shared with others at one of their conferences. So I will turn the floor over. He will also be talking about the Nexus Now for business owners. So a lot of you will get some great information on that during the session. And anything else, Bill, that you'd like to share that I haven't, please go ahead and do. And thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Absolutely. It is great to be here with you and to be here with everybody in this virtual world we're all occupying these days. And for those of you who are not that familiar with the Allegheny Conference, the organization's been around for 75 years, a little over that. It's not part of Allegheny County government. It's non-governmental. It's actually a 501c3. It's a private sector organization, a nonprofit that works to improve the economy and the quality of life. So the conference is kind of like an umbrella. And then underneath that umbrella, we have three affiliates: the Pittsburgh Regional Alliance, which I'll talk about a little bit later on some of the work they're doing, which is about marketing the region for business investment and talent; the Pennsylvania Economy League, that does research and analysis on kind of where things stand in the region and where we're headed. I'm going to be sharing some of their data this morning. And then finally, last but not least, the Greater Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce. And the Chamber is our advocate in Harrisburg and in Washington, D.C. to try to get policies changed, get government to invest, all the things we need to do to make the region more competitive. And it is in that capacity, the Southwest Communities Chamber, 24 chambers across the region, very actively work with us. And that partnership is critical because, the conference tends to represent 300 or so of the largest employers in the region. That's our membership. But when all these chambers come together, we represent thousands, if not more than 10,000 businesses in southwestern Pennsylvania. And when we can go to Harrisburg together and make that case and representing that many organizations, they pay attention. And it really helps us to be able to move policy and legislation and regulation forward in a way that helps, we hope, all the employers in the region. And we figure if employers in the region are doing better, then their employees are going to be doing better. There's going to be more jobs and opportunity for everybody who lives here. So I want to mention that because the partnership we have with Mandy and the Southwest Communities and with all the other chambers is just critically important to our ability to be successful in improving the economy and the quality of life of the region. But I'm going to I mentioned the conference has been around for 75 years. I'm not going to go back through ancient history. I'm going to start with a little bit of recent history. I'm going to start with the turn of the century, the turn of the 21st century, just to kind of give you some context for where we were before the pandemic hit. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are. And again, I'm tapping a lot of information from my colleagues at the Pennsylvania Economy League. And then looking forward, especially with an election just around the corner, less than a week away, kind of the issues that are on our minds, where we think the region has the biggest challenges as a result of the pandemic and the recession, and also where we think the region has some really big opportunities and then what we all need to do together to both tackle the challenges and overcome them, and also hopefully take advantage of the opportunities and really propel the entire region forward as we emerge. Whoops, I've got to turn off my phone. Sorry about that. What happened? Sorry. That was weird. All right. Too many things. Steve, I'm in the studio. I have like 4 other people that manage all of this stuff. I'm here by myself in my living room trying to do it. So at any rate, so yeah, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities, what we all can think about doing together. So with that, I'm going to try to share my screen. So let's see here. All right, Mandy, did that work?
Yes, it's up
Good.
and running.
You can see me. Mandy's my technical support to make sure you're seeing what I'm seeing. So cool. So I'm going to talk, as I said, I'm going to talk about issues and opportunities and kind of what's now and what's next for the region as we think about where we go from here, hopefully as we emerge from the pandemic in the not too distant future. If I can get my slide to change. There we go. Now it's working. All right. So first off, kind of the dynamics that have really been driving the regional economy here in the 21st century. So as I said, I'm going to go back to the turn of the century to begin. Actually, not quite to the turn of the century. I'm going to start with 2 unrelated events that happened within a year apart, early in the century, in the middle of the last decade, that really have shaped the economic dynamics throughout southwestern Pennsylvania in the 15 years or so since. And the first event was the arrival of Range Resources in 2004 when they struck gas in the Marcellus Shale. And I don't need to tell everybody in the Southwest communities or in our region about the significance of that discovery, but it turned out that deep beneath the Marcellus and the overlapping Utica Shale was one of the richest natural gas reserves on the planet. And it really unleashed a significant amount of capital investment and exploration and development as a result of that, that became, as time moved forward, incredibly important to the dynamics of the region, especially coming out of the last recession, out of the Great Recession. The other event, again, completely unrelated and semi-coincidental, was the arrival of Google in the region in 2005. A year after Range struck gas, Google set up a little research lab on the Carnegie Mellon campus to be close to all that talent so that they could begin to develop new technologies to help them with their search technologies at Google. And both of those pathways, both of those events unleash new economic trends in the region that really shape the opportunities and some of the challenges that we have here today. I always like to show this map of the natural gas opportunity just because it gives you a sense of the scale of the play. This is just the Marcellus, but also sort of Pittsburgh's, our region's strategic place in that. Obviously you can see the circle that surrounds the sort of the 32 county power of 32 Pittsburgh region. You can see the 10 counties that are in the service area of the Allegheny Conference. And then that brownish splotch that goes from upstate New York all the way down through West Virginia and actually into North Carolina is the Marcellus Shale. And I point that out because Pittsburgh's the only major metro anywhere in that big splotch of that gas play. We're also the only place with a true international airport. So there's a huge strategic rationale for that industry to be based here, not just to drill for gas, but to bring brain power here, to have corporate presence here. And so it's that business case that's really been able to propel what we've seen in the development of the industry over the past 15 years or so. And of course, it culminated a number of years ago, actually almost 5 years ago now, with Shell's decision to build the petrochemical facility that's under construction up in Beaver County at Monaca. Literally almost 6,000 people on site right now, and they've managed to operate that construction site during the pandemic. They had to shut down for a while, but pretty remarkable that they're managing to continue to build and create that site over time. So in a lot of ways, that investment's the culmination of a lot of activity that we've seen here over the last 15 years. And if you go back and look at the employment dynamics in the region over the past decade, so much of our recovery from the Great Recession was really due to the investment and the growth we saw in the natural gas industry at the time. And obviously the industry is more established now. The growth rate has slowed, and then it's obviously further complicated by the recession itself and lower energy prices. So we're not seeing the booming demand that we saw back then. And coming out of the Great Recession, Pittsburgh was actually one of the top 3 regions that led the country out of the Great Recession, recovering the jobs that have been lost as a result. And a lot of that was due to the boom that we were experiencing in natural gas. So still an important part of our economy, still activity happening, and certainly it's shaped a lot of the opportunity for the entire region over the past 10 or 15 years. Back to the Google part of the story, that sort of parallel track we've been on. Google was the one that really got the world's heads turning. They said, Google, why? What are they doing in Pittsburgh? And then they expanded to Bakery Square from the CMU campus right after the Great Recession. And it really turned heads. And it began to change perceptions of opportunity here in Pittsburgh. But it really wasn't just Google. And that's what this timeline shows. Bosch actually showed up here 20 years ago, big German technology company, also on the CMU campus. Intel opened a research center in 2001. Apple showed up actually again on the CMU campus in 2005, then Google, but then Microsoft, Disney, Yahoo, and then more recently, you can kind of see the acceleration on the time. This is a partial list. This is not everything that's happened here in tech over the course of the past 20 years, but we can see the acceleration of investment by many of the biggest global names in IT and software and technology. And again, that has begun to build momentum itself, especially over the last 5 years or so, when Uber showed up in town and we really began to see the autonomous vehicle industry take off in a big way. And so that's changed perceptions, and that's also given us a lot of momentum heading into the recession, which is good timing, I suppose. If you want to see it on a map, you can really see how the technology investment has been popping up all around the city of Pittsburgh. And a lot of it surrounds Oakland. A lot of it surrounds the universities. This is all IT. We could do a similar map now in the life sciences space, and we're beginning to see investment in various life sciences startups and established companies. Obviously, Philips would be the one in the life sciences space on this map. Out in East Liberty, but it really is like a circle that surrounds Oakland and Carnegie Mellon and Pitt. And we're continuing to see interest. There's continuing to be investment, and it's really also redefining Pittsburgh and the region. Really important. So now, because of that growth, we really have pretty strong strengths across a number of important industries. Obviously, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing continues to be a fundamental driver of the economy, a little softer right now. Energy continues to be important. It's a significant piece of the regional economy. And financial and business services is actually the largest sector in the region, which surprises a lot of Pittsburghers. It's a little more than 25% of GDP is financial and business services. And total employment in business services is things like legal, accounting, marketing, basically everybody that helps to run companies, right? That's kind of business services. And then banking, obviously, a big part of that. And a really total employment in financial and business services these days in the metro is roughly the same as healthcare and life sciences. So we often talk about Pittsburgh being kind of a healthcare town and how healthcare really drove the rebirth of the regional economy. But we're every bit as much, if not more, a banking and financial services town. And it's really important. So those are kind of our traditional historic strengths. But now we've seen this growth. We've seen this growth in IT and robotics. We've seen the growth in healthcare and life sciences. And we believe that the pandemic and what we're dealing with now is going to have, is going to add additional drivers to some of those trends that were already emerging. One good example is life sciences. This is actually a recent report earlier this month by CBRE, the big real estate firm, and they've named Pittsburgh the top emerging market for life sciences companies in the United States, just ahead of Houston and Austin, Texas. So, and they're thinking about it from a commercial real estate play, but we've certainly begun to see investment in that space. And it just shows that the investment that's been made here in Pittsburgh, especially over the last 20 years, but arguably over the whole past generation, is really beginning to pay off in terms of life sciences opportunities, R&D, and some of the places we can go from here. On the tech side, obviously, the Advanced Robotics and Manufacturing Institute, that's Carnegie Mellon's and National Manufacturing Institute out in Hazelwood Green, and that's Mill 19, which is the building that the ARM Institute occupies out there, and really trying to push the edge of when it comes to manufacturing in terms of adopting technology out there. And that's the development is starting to happen there on the old Hazelwood Coke Works site. That's the first building to be occupied. I was out earlier in the week at the old Roundhouse that's now being redeveloped into an innovation center for entrepreneurs and people to come and test new ideas and incubate them. So things are beginning to happen on the old LTV Coke Works site in Hazelwood that are exciting now and potentially going to deliver real benefit over time. Then there's the additive manufacturing and 3D printing space. There's a General Electric, unfortunately, has recently announced plans to close their Pittsburgh operation. They were really one of the pioneers here in investing in an additive manufacturing or 3D printing operation. But Arconic and Alcoa still have their operation out in Westmoreland County, and offsetting General Electric, Wabtec, the original Westinghouse air brake, just announced plans to build their own additive manufacturing 3D printing facility out at Neighborhood 91 near the airport, where the airport is building an entire campus for additive manufacturing companies. So again, it's the 3D printing, it's this idea of mass customization to produce products. And the whole idea, whether you look at ARM Institute or whether you look at what's happening at Neighbor 91, is really to make Pittsburgh the place, our region the place where manufacturing is reinvented for the future. I mean, Pittsburgh was one of the inventors of modern manufacturing in the first place back after the Civil War. Now we're in a position where we can help to reinvent manufacturing for the future. And so it's exciting to see these types of investments happening here as well. It's also exciting to see the robot cars running around town. We have multiple research operations in Pittsburgh now related to autonomous vehicles. Argo AI, big investment from Ford Motor Company, one of the really exciting startups here in town on the forefront of autonomous vehicles. Aurora just announced plans to expand into a new facility in the Strip District. So we're seeing ongoing expansion and investment in this realm of autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, which is really exciting. So that's kind of where we were. That's what's happened over the last 20 years to sort of create the platform for the regional economy in tech, in energy, and in life sciences. So a lot going on that's really positive that we're very excited about. And of course, then came COVID-19 last March. That really has changed everything, or certainly changed our direction in the short run. Even before the pandemic, if you looked at what was happening later last year in the regional economy, we were already slowing down in kind of the 18-19 timeframe. Some of that was related to the drop in energy prices. And the reality is, although we have a diverse economy, we have been riding that cyclical wave with the energy industry in a way that really didn't happen before we had Marcellus shale. So, one of the great things is we have that huge energy opportunity here. One of the challenging things is it tends to be cyclical. And so we have to think about that as we think about the performance of the regional economy. Plus, some big construction projects were beginning to wind down. We were beginning to see some of that fall off as well. So there was some slowing in the regional economy. And then, of course, we took the wallop of the pandemic and everything that's meant, especially in leisure and hospitality, but to other sectors. And now we have employment at levels we haven't seen since the 1980s. Looking forward, our population dynamics. We have an older population. We were losing population again the last couple of years after gaining after the Great Recession at the beginning of the decade. So clearly our population dynamics get in the way of our recovery as well. And you can see on that graph from my colleagues at the Economy League, just what falling off that cliff really meant here from late February or the end of February to the middle of April, when we began to see some turnaround in the regional economy. That orange line is the United States, the blue line, which hadn't quite turned when this graph was created in April. That's us, that's southwestern Pennsylvania. So very much mirroring what happened to the nation as a whole in the early days of the pandemic. During that period of time, February to April, we lost 202,000 jobs in the metro, in the regional economy. And even now, although we've seen a bounce back, and we just got the latest unemployment figures for September, the jobless rate in September here was 8.2%. So we've recovered a bit since August, but we're still shy about 100,000 jobs of where we were before the pandemic. And for comparison's sake, if you go all the way back to the 1980s, and certainly the Great Recession, That's on par with what happened to the region in terms of employment loss in both of those deep recessions. The steel bust that, essentially destroyed Pittsburgh's industrial economy, and then also post-Great Recession. We actually are, even though we've recovered, we're still on par with the worst of the Great Recession right now. So, that's the question mark. So what happens next? Do we continue this bounce back, and does it accelerate? What's really ahead in terms of the performance of the regional economy? And this graph kind of shows total employment in the region through the 5 recessions that the 4 that I've experienced since I moved to Pittsburgh, and now we're in the 5th with the current pandemic recession. But you can see the hit we took during the steel bust. You can see the hit during the Great Recession. And it's, again, just worth noting that where we are right now, after the recovery we've seen so far from the worst of the shock in the spring, is still on par with kind of the bottom of some of those earlier recessions. So we've got a ways to come back. We're still a long way from getting back to normal, or what we would perceive to be the healthy kind of economy we enjoyed last year. So what's next? And that's the big question. Where do we go from here? What's going to happen as we think about the future? And economists have been playing I don't know if it's an alphabet or a symbol game over the past several months, and trying to say, what kind of an economy are we experiencing? This is obviously a national and international conversation, but it's important to us here in the region, because it's going to determine the opportunities that we have, or the challenges that we have regionally, in the context of a national economy and what's happening. So there's been talk, and there was talk early on, about the V-shaped recovery, that we would take this enormous hit, but the country would spring back essentially and relatively quickly. Perhaps if there was no public health emergency and a pandemic, that might be playing out that way. But we have the overlay of the uncertainty around the public health dynamics. And so I think the consensus at least of the economists I've talked to, is that a V is less and less likely, and we're going to see some other shape going forward. One told me he still thinks it's a Nike swoosh, that steep fall off and then just kind of gradual recovery over time, but a recovery that could well take a couple of 3 years to get all the way back to where we were. So that's the Nike swoosh idea. And then there's the square root, which in some ways it can be the scariest. That's where you're going along, you fall off, you have a little bounce back, and then you have what they call a jobless recovery. Nothing happens. It just goes forward. And that's a lot like what we experienced, for those of you in the audience with a few gray hairs. We experienced that in the 1970s, kind of stagflation, that economy that just went sideways, with no job creation, high interest rates. I mean, it's not the same dynamics as now, but that's that sort of jobless recovery dynamic. And that's one of the concerns. And we're certainly seeing a slowing in the overall economic performance from the rapid recovery we saw in the summer. And now, as we're heading into the fall, and especially with the rising cases of COVID, we're seeing the economy, signs of the economy slowing down again. And so economists are concerned that that could be a challenge going forward. And then the other one is the K-shaped recovery. And that's this idea, and we're also seeing signs of this, where a certain sector of the economy is actually doing pretty well. If you're equipped, as all of us are, to join each other on Zoom and to operate remotely, and you can run your businesses no matter where your people are, things are kind of okay. You tend, if you're better educated, if you have a college education, if you can work these types of jobs, it doesn't feel as bad. But then there's the other part of the economy, and those are the organizations that don't have the capacity to operate this way. They tend to have, less well-educated people. For whatever reason, they're not able to perform in this kind of less technology intensive businesses. And so you have this phenomenon where the bigger and the richer and the better educated are getting better faster, and then the poorer and the smaller and the less well educated are losing more ground. And so this disparity that's already been an issue in our region for decades, and especially even since the Great Recession, this disparity has begun to increase. And so my colleagues at the Economy League think, and at the Chamber, think this K-shaped recession is really what's unfolding. And we're going to have a tale of two economies going forward. And that has some significant challenges from a social and a civic policy side, apart from the economic issues that are arising as a result of that. So what the conference did, we spent our summer talking to our members, doing a lot of research, and again, it's my colleagues at the Pennsylvania Economy League, and also working with some national consultants who operate in this space and were studying the impact of the pandemic and the recession and where it might lead. And so what we did earlier this month was we rolled out a Pittsburgh Region Recovery Framework, we call it. It's available on our website. So if you want to dig into it in depth, you can go to the website, AlleghenyConference.org, and it's there as a PDF. You can download it or you can just look at it online. And what we tried to do was map out the big disruptions that our region is facing, some of which are common across the country, some of which, though, we're more exposed in some ways because for a variety of reasons, and I'll talk about a couple shortly. But at any rate, here are the disruptions that are really shaping the prospects of the region as we move forward into the second half of this year and into next year. But within those disruption can be really bad, but it can also create opportunities if you can spot them and you can take advantage of them. And we think some of these disruptions may have created new opportunities for our region as well that we should try to capture. So it's not all bad just because we're experiencing these disruptions. And then we also came up with a half a dozen actions that we think the region collectively, not just the Allegheny Conference, it's literally all of us, have to find a way to work together if we really want to accelerate our ability to get back to where we were. Not let that Nike swoosh play out. Maybe we can have a more rapid recovery over time if we can really engage in some of these areas where we think the region has real opportunities, and also obviously tackle some of the challenges that exist. So that's what's in the Pittsburgh Region Recovery Framework document. And again, you'll find it on our website at AlleghenyConference.org. So one of the big areas of disruptions that we're concerned about, obviously, is the employment situation. Even in mid-September, we still had 120,000 people around here filing for unemployment. So that's a huge number. That's on par with the deepest recessions we've experienced here in the last 40 years. So it's certainly not insignificant. I haven't seen the number updated at the end of the month, but it's still a big number. The unemployment rate obviously has declined. It was 10.5% in August, and as I mentioned, it's since gone down to a little over 8%. So that's challenging, or that's good news that it's improving, but 8.2% is still a significant unemployment rate, especially when you compare it to 4.5%, which is what it was before the pandemic. The other thing that's a concern, and it's a concern not just here, but across the country, is that the easy jobs to get back, we've gotten back. A lot of what's been driving the employment improvement has been people returning to work, returning to their jobs. But now there's this specter of permanent unemployment arising, that people just won't have the skills or the ability to move into the jobs that are being created and will be created. And so we're going to have to deal just here within the region, as well as across the country, with this dynamic of permanent unemployment and how we're going to match people to opportunity and make sure that they can participate. This especially plays out among the have-nots in the region. Obviously there was disparity here before all of this. And the thing about a crisis like this, any type of a recession, is that the disparity tends to get worse. I mean, I've seen that in the almost 40 years I've been in Pittsburgh. After every recession, the economic disparity between the haves and have-nots in southwestern Pennsylvania has gotten worse. And so if we're not careful, it can happen again in a big way as a result of what we're experiencing right now. For example, before the pandemic, persons of color were 3 times more likely to be unemployed here than white workers. And they're more exposed because they tend to be in jobs that are most impacted by the pandemic in a variety of ways, and especially by the subsequent restrictions. Think about a lot of the service jobs and hospitality and restaurants and things like that. That has a disproportionate impact of the non-white population in the region. Now we also saw the encouraging news we'd seen on declining unemployment over the summer, or in the late spring and early summer, began to reverse very late in the summer. Some of that was because the governor cracked down again on restaurant operations in early August, but there was also began to be a tailing off in some important sectors here: construction, wholesale trade, transportation and warehousing, and some other services. The reason I wanted to show you this graph, though, is this is monthly unemployment this year, and this is kind of through July. what you can see is that gray line, that's the United States. And that was 10.2% at the time that this chart was created. The orange line is Pennsylvania. It was 13.7 at the time. And our region was 14.3% unemployment. The reason I show you that, these numbers are all dated now, but we're underperforming the national economy right now in the recovery from the pandemic. And that's something we all just need to be aware of. Just another indication we're not out of the woods. And then there's a lot of work to be done to bring us back. The other thing we're watching very closely is actual sectors. And in some cases, as I mentioned, some industries and some sectors are going to be materially impacted by all of this. In other cases, they might actually benefit or create an opportunity, as we talked about with disruption. So the sectors that, based on our analysis, we need to be the most concerned about in terms of a slower recovery. It's going to take more time. Leisure and hospitality, that's obvious. We're all living that in all of our communities across the region. Energy and manufacturing, for a variety of reasons, they tend to be cyclical with an economy. And so when you have a recession, they tend to be impacted. Retail, obviously the huge shift there toward online and potentially at the expense of Main Street and brick and mortar retailers. So a lot of disruption there. And even social and government services, not that there isn't demand, but are they going to have the ability to pay for it? And to provide those services. And we're also concerned in our region in particular about higher education. We have a high concentration of higher education here, 35 colleges and universities in the 10 counties. At a time of declining numbers of 18-year-olds, colleges were already looking a few years into the future and saying and understanding they face a real enrollment crunch not too far away. And so that means our higher education sector is going to be under stress, as is higher education everywhere. But because it's disproportionately concentrated here in the Pittsburgh region relative to the rest of the country, means we have more at stake and more at risk in terms of how the dynamics play out in higher ed as a business going forward. On the flip side, faster recovery, healthcare and life sciences. We have a lot of research and businesses that are working very hard in the space of the pandemic, related technologies and research. Clearly, there's demand for healthcare services. And so there's real upside potential there. And as we mentioned at the beginning, tech-related business services. We feel especially the real competitive advantages for our region where we really stand out: artificial intelligence, robotics, cybersecurity, autonomous vehicles, kind of a subset of the robotics space. But those are areas where we are already global leaders, and there are areas with huge potential demand, and that's a wave we might be able to ride going forward along with the life sciences space. So some really strong potential upside in those sectors. Big concern across the board about small businesses from our research. Based on some of our estimates, there could be a third of the small businesses in the region could potentially close as a result of all of this. That's 14,000 to 21,000 small businesses. That's a lot. And you think about the impact of the regional chambers of commerce that have a lot of small business members. So it's when we think about organizations like ours, it's an issue, but clearly it's an issue for those business owners. A lot of people work for small businesses. You don't think about it necessarily because there's a few here and a few there. But when you add it up, the ones we could lose, that 14,000 to 21,000, you're talking to 188,000 workers. That's a big, big part of the regional economy that are at risk. So, and obviously then within that universe, minority and women-owned businesses are more at risk because they tend to be more exposed to the sectors that are most at risk, and they also tend to be undercapitalized relative to the majority of small businesses. So a lot to think about, and I think a really important role for chambers of commerce to play across the region to understand what their business members need and to make sure they're getting the resources and the information that they need to be able to find their way through this and come out on the other side. Digital infrastructure is a huge issue for the region. We've certainly learned that in Zoom world, where we're all living right now. We know that if you have connectivity, you're better able to work, you're better able to learn, you can still go to school. And if you're not, you are at a huge disadvantage right now. When we looked at the numbers, only a little less than 2/3 of Black households in the region actually have access to digital technology, to broadband, and the ability to plug into the internet at home. And of course, for a while, the libraries were all closed, so it wasn't like you go to the library and use the computers there. Then that's significantly lower than the percentage of white households, which is about 3/4 of white households in the region had good digital connectivity. Less than 2/3 of Black households do. And then it's an urban-rural divide as well. It's kind of stunning that 8 out of the 10 counties in our region, more than a quarter of the households don't have internet connectivity. I think that would surprise a lot of us, that even here in our region, more than a quarter of the people in 8 out of 10 counties don't have internet connectivity. And that's worse than the nation as a whole. The gap is 20%. And again, that's a competitive disadvantage for our region. If we don't have connectivity, if we don't have broadband, if we can't make that available, companies may choose and people may choose to live and invest in places that do. And the last one I'm going to talk about is municipal solvency, which was a real scare in the early part of the pandemic, that Allegheny County was facing a significant loss in sales tax revenue, which gets redistributed to all the municipalities, the smaller communities like the members, like those all of you are operating in the South Hills. Tax revenue was down 6% through August. Now we've seen some recovery and it's not quite as dire as it was in the spring and summer, but the city itself is experiencing it. What we're concerned about is maybe not this fiscal year in municipal budgets, but the echo effect of all of this. If the economy slows down again, if we start to see a real kind of a resurgence of recession, or at least a significant slowdown, further loss of tax revenue, we could see issues because of the high unemployment rates, around foreclosures, around evictions, individuals being unable to pay their taxes, their changes in spending patterns. We haven't seen that yet. But again, looking ahead into the next fiscal year and looking into next year, this is an area to really watch and to be paying attention to in the communities you live in, because some of these operational issues are going to become more and more of a concern as we head forward. So what do we do about all of this? Well, these are the 6 action areas that I talked about that the conference has identified. And look, there's a lot of action that's required across the board in so many different ways. We tried to identify 6 that we felt would have the material impact on accelerating the economy, specifically, and getting us back. I mean, there's social services issues, there's educational issues. I mean, there's a lot. But these are 6 that we felt, if the business community could really focus in these 6 areas and support them, we could do a lot to help bring us back out of the hole we've fallen into. One is and I'm going to talk about 2 of these in a little more depth, but accelerating the innovation economy. Let's ride the train in life science, ride the wave in life sciences and tech. Competitiveness, business climate. How do we make sure we have the right environment for businesses and employers to grow here? Municipal insolvency, I already talked about that. What do we need to do to shore up the ability of municipalities to provide the services that we all rely on? Reskilling, I mentioned that permanent unemployment problem. What do we need to do to reskill the people in the region who are otherwise not prepared to go back into a decent job? The whole issue of small and mid-sized business intervention. How do we get them resources? How do we get them the expertise, the talent, whatever it takes to be able to thrive? And then what we call critical amenities. This is the quality of life. Arts and culture, those organizations have been hammered by what's been happening here. Think about concerts, think about sports teams, think about everything that makes our region such a great place to live. That whole sector is at risk. And so what do we need to do as a community to really shore that up and make sure that it's going to continue to thrive and be there for all of us going forward? Because it's a huge competitive advantage if we can preserve that. So just quickly on accelerating the innovation economy, and I already mentioned where we think the opportunities are in life sciences, AI, robotics, and cybersecurity. There's lots of opportunities across our economy. Our feeling is just that in the near term, for the next 12 months, these areas offer a greater opportunity for growth than other sectors of the regional economy. Doesn't mean we stop doing all that other stuff. It doesn't mean, we walk away from the other sectors completely, but it's just, where are we going to emphasize? What are we going to really focus on to try to accelerate faster? We think these areas are worth focusing on when we think about economic development and opportunity for the region. So to really unlock them, that gets us to the competitiveness piece. Clearly a big infrastructure investment would be helpful, and especially if you think about things like broadband and 5G infrastructure and that digital connectivity. The recession has shown critically important. Smart transportation systems could help us unlock the potential of some of our old industrial sites, right? Think about, I showed you the ARM Institute at Hazelwood Green, which is kind of on this isolated, a couple of 100 acres of vacant industrial land, kind of disconnected from Oakland and the universities. Well, could new transportation systems help us to bridge that gap, and not just there, but elsewhere around the region as well. A supportive Pennsylvania economic development and attraction policy, and this is where all the chambers can get involved. This is a real opportunity for the state to take a good hard look at itself and say, look, who's doing it better than we are? You know, what policies do they have in other states where they're more effective at attracting investment and job creation? And can we encourage, if we do this collectively with our chamber partners across the state, can we encourage the state to improve its effectiveness in this space? And what we've heard from prior to the pandemic, especially in the tech world, is Pennsylvania is one of the few states, if not the only state north of the Mason-Dixon line, that does not have a statewide anti-discrimination law that applies to LGBTQ. And we've had companies tell us that's an issue for them. It sends a signal that Pennsylvania is not welcoming relative to other states in the north and northeast. And so that's an area we think the state should really look hard at, because it's becoming a competitive disadvantage as we try to attract talent. And talent is more mobile, right? In a remote world, in a virtual world, you can kind of live and work anywhere. So people will be making these decisions about where they want to be by the places they think are going to be the most welcoming to people like them. And if we as a community, if we as a Commonwealth send a signal that we're not as welcoming as other places to certain types of people, that could come back to bite us in the long run. And the last thing I'm going to mention, and we can open it up for some questions, is just an opportunity for all of you to help. And really, I would hope everybody would help as best they can. We've spent the last year at the conference, my colleagues in our marketing communications group, we had a strategic communications committee of our board members that worked on it to really come up with a new unified message or brand for the region, which we call Pittsburgh Region Next is Now. And the idea is really to focus the world's attention on all the things I've been talking about, the stuff that's emerging here, that's really redefining the future of our region, both today and tomorrow of our region. We have it on our website. You can go to AlleghenyConference.org, or you can just type in Pittsburgh Next is Now. You can Google that, and you'll go to the branding website, which is designed to market the region. There's a whole toolkit there. So if you're trying to attract talent to the region and you say, man, I wish I had a brochure that would describe how cool this place would be for somebody in the financial business, well, there's a little brochure there. You can just download it. It's all free. We're doing it as a community service. We just want to help employers of all sizes in the region. We want to give them the tools they need to better market the region and spread the word about all the great things that are unfolding here. So to give you a sense of what's on of the tools, I'm going to play a quick video that we launched as part of the launch of Pittsburgh Next is Now a few weeks ago. So hopefully this will work.
We're working to overcome hunger by crowdsourcing the delivery of surplus food to people who need it most. We are building a tech-powered movement globally. That's the community spirit of Pittsburgh.
In Pittsburgh, we shape the world. I started Duolingo to give everyone in the world a chance to learn a language for free. We became one of the most downloaded apps of all time, and our team does it from Pittsburgh.
Yes, we are going to the moon. We are building the future here. There have only been 3 nations that have ever landed on the surface of the moon. Pittsburgh Nation will be the next.
Icons are made here. At Nosland, I'm building a business that's true to myself and the values I believe in. We can thrive in part because of Pittsburgh's support of creative entrepreneurship.
In Pittsburgh, purpose drives us.
In Pittsburgh, you shape the world.
In Pittsburgh, we build.
In Pittsburgh, you can become iconic.
So that's our launch video. We've populated a few videos on the site, and there's some imagery on the site. As I mentioned, there's some brochures on the Next is Now site. We want to continue to build that out. And what we're also doing is doing a series of branding workshops across the region, which have just started actually yesterday. And Mandy, if you want, I can give you the information so any of your members who are interested in sitting in and understanding how to use these tools and really take advantage of it to market the region, we would love to have you participate in one of these sessions. Again, it's all free. All the stuff is free. But I think if all of us could start to talk about the region the same way and the opportunity that we see here using the same tools, we think we could really make a difference over time, especially with everything in flux right now. There's a real opportunity to focus attention on places with a positive story to tell. And we think Pittsburgh, despite all the challenges I've been talking about, we think that's a story we can tell. So I thought I'd leave you with this graphic, which I've shown you before, but what I always like to show, other than just the red line and all the ups and downs, is the underlying green line, which is the overall for all the ups and downs of all those recessions over the past 50 years. That green line just keeps going up. And we really feel that despite all the challenges that we're experiencing here in our region right now, that if we come together as we have in the past through all those other downturns, we can build every bit as bright a future, and we can keep that green line moving in the right direction, as we head deeper into this decade. And so with that, that's kind of my overview of kind of where we are, what's now and what's next, and I'd be happy to take questions or get some of your thoughts too. We're always curious at the Allegheny Conference about what you all are hearing and what's going on around the region. So please, Mandy, I guess we turn it over to you.
Yes. And thank you. If next is now, and this says upcoming election, the election is still a week away, but we can start making changes and start learning, more about what's going on in the region today. So I appreciate all the information. I know everybody else here has. I do have one question. With the service sector workforce lagging in other industries in the variety of ways you've shared, do you anticipate an increase to the minimum wage regardless of the election outcome?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, it's a political football right now in terms of attitudes about it. And I think it kind of depends, does it not, on who wins and what's the sentiment like in Congress. I think there's a growing sense that some improvement in the minimum wage is going to be critical to be able to bring us out of this. What does that number look like? How much momentum does it get? Which party, if they control Congress and the White House, is going to be most motivated to do more? I think that's going to be one of the results we'll see from the election. So, I wish I had more answers. It's really been on our minds recently. Man, this is such a tough environment because it's so hard to predict. We've never really had a recession, and I showed you all the others. We've never really had a recession coupled with a pandemic. So really trying to understand what the future holds and how this will play out in the context of this public health dynamic is really challenging. And I think it makes every crystal ball a lot cloudier than perhaps it's been in years past.
And I have another question about the senior living industry. In senior living, we have a shortage of workers in everything from dining services to nursing. Where did all of our workers go?
Yeah, one of the issues that I didn't talk about, and it is in our list, but it wasn't in the 6 that I showed you, but I think it's a concern just for not just in senior living, but across the board, is in the space of childcare. I did talk a little bit about how social services has been negatively impacted by the recession and by what's been unfolding. Well, there was a survey just released today by WESA and Campos Marketing here in town that said that almost half the people in the region they surveyed are having a hard time accessing childcare. Well, if you can't access childcare, you can't work. And that especially impacts women, obviously, because they tend to be the primary caregivers. So if they can't work, I think those industries that are more dependent on women in the workforce, that are more dependent on women who really need that access to childcare, are going to continue to struggle. I mean, they may be willing to work, they may be wanting to work, but we've also seen some anecdotal evidence that people are just choosing. They're saying, I got to take care of my kids. I'm just not going to be able to do my job. And I think we suspect that's what's impacting employers across the region as well. And I imagine in an industry, and without knowing that much about senior living and the dynamics, but I would imagine that whole issue would disproportionately impact that kind of an industry.
Thank you. The next question would be, with so many businesses working from home, is there any concern with the commercial real estate sector in the Pittsburgh area, but especially in town, which also affects the businesses servicing those workers?
Sure. I mean, that's one of the great unknowns. I think everybody's trying to figure it out. I was talking with some of the folks in downtown real estate recently, and they said, everybody's got leases. So far, downtown occupancy and the core office occupancy is holding up very well, because if you got a lease, you got a lease. But the question that's on everybody's minds is what happens when some of those leases are up and these companies begin to make decisions about their workforce going forward, and how much are they going to continue to work remotely? How much are they going to need an office? Is the nature of those offices going to change? And we've heard, again, anecdotally, different companies have different philosophies about it. We've heard some saying, we could just go remote from now on. We're not going to need great big offices anymore. Others have said we really value the cultural and creative advantages of having people together in a workplace, so we're not ready to give that up. But I'm not sure we've really seen the dynamics play out yet to really understand what kind of an impact it could have over the long run. But and it's not just those big empty office buildings and shedding a tear for the building owners and managers, which we do. But it's all the businesses that surround them, back to the restaurants, back to the small retail, back to the whole service industry that supports, in downtown in particular. We did some surveys before the pandemic about attitudes people had, and people across the region told us that they're really proud of downtown Pittsburgh and everything that's been created there over the last 20 or 30 years, right? The cultural district, the vitality, what's been happening with Market Square. And that seemed to kind of universal. Everybody has a little bit of pride in how far we've come. And that's at risk, that vitality, that dynamic, depending on how all of this plays out. And I think, as I've talked to people in commercial real estate, and I don't know if we have anybody, on the call who's more familiar with it than I am, but that's the big question everybody's asking themselves right now. What are the real implications over time for that type of a corporate center that we've built here over the course of the past generation?
Thank you. Is there any more questions out there? We have time for 2 more. If anybody would like to, has any thoughts, concerns.
Yeah, and if anybody thinks, no, that's not what I'm seeing, Bill, you ought to be aware of this. This is something totally different you didn't even talk about. Please chime in, because we're always gathering information and trying to understand what's going on with businesses across our region. So if there's anything that I said that you think, that's not what I'm seeing, we would love to hear about it.
No.
Thank you, Joe. I saw your post there. No,
I thought something updated. I was like, all right. Well, if there's any more questions for Bill that you come up with after the session is done, feel free to email me. I'll get it over to him and make sure you get it answered.
And Mandy, I would just say too, because you can be a channel. I mean, if your members, they have questions or they need information. I mean, Mandy, because of her involvement with our chamber partnership and the Greater Pittsburgh Chamber, if she wants information from us, we're going to give it to her. And I think it's something the Southwest Communities Chamber could take advantage of that you probably don't. If there's specific things, we have a whole market research team, a whole policy research team on staff, and they're really bright people. And, we can't do everything for everybody, but if there's specific challenges or opportunities or things you want to better understand, please send them through Mandy and we'll try to help. And please go to the Nexus Now website, spend some time on it, have your communications or marketing people, if you have them, dig into it. And if they can participate in one of these workshops, please do, because it's really one of the most important things we think people can do, especially in the short run, to begin to change perceptions.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, if one company in an industry is having an issue, it's likely that there's more in that industry. So having a voice and opinionating it is going to help bring the issue to the masses as as important to you as the challenges are. So thank you, Bill. And the Greater Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce also is going to be having a legislative reception in early December, but I guess they're working out the details right now. So
trying to do it virtually like everything else, trying to figure out what that means. More to come.
Absolutely. Coming up this month, we'll also have virtual networking and our annual meeting. We're still working out the details on that as well. Stay tuned. Go join our newsletter if you haven't been on there already. And thank you once again, Bill, for joining us today. Make sure you are following Bill. I think he's on LinkedIn. Allegheny Conference on Community Development is on LinkedIn. You'll get updates and information as it comes through. So thanks for joining us today, and look forward to working with you again soon.
Take care. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.